LA Progressive Friends and Family, Dick and Sharon back here again with you. And once again with a writer we much admire, Andrea Mazzarino. How you doing, Andrea?
Fine, thank you. How
So
about
she
yourself?
recently wrote an article called July 4th and the Costs of Forgetting America's War. And Andrea's in kind of a unique position, somewhat unique. On the one hand, she's a longtime military spouse, probably spent some of her life living in military communities, has kids who conceivably could join the military someday. And on the other hand, she's a psychotherapist who works with people, service members who've been damaged by warfare. And so what do you take about the hoopla that goes on around July 4th, the flyovers, the parades, and how does that affect the veterans that you work with?
I think that the flyovers and the hoopla have a place. I've enjoyed fireworks and barbecues and some of the festive aspects of July 4th with my family, especially. And at the same time, I think that we need to be sensitive to how some of the festivities and this holiday and the way we talk about it impact different groups of people. Um, I didn't cover the range of feelings I have about the holiday in this article, but I focused on how veterans, like those I see, feel about loud noises and fireworks in particular. Fireworks, came about because they represent um, gunshots and bombs and from our war for independence, and it's easy to forget that. But war on terror vets and vets from earlier wars in US history have some strong reactions to those loud noises sometimes. And many of the people I see in my practice and know in my life feel scared or startled when they hear fireworks going off because the sound recalls actual warfare, particularly for people who have been in combat situations on the ground. Um, and especially when that comes in the days before and after July 4th and not on the day of, that can be very, very jarring because it's not expected. So people will sometimes hit the ground or go into an all-out flashback or just feel really anxious um, when they hear fireworks that they don't expect in particular.
Yeah, for various reasons of my own, I have never really celebrated the 4th of July. Um, but when I read your article and actually, and I think I hope you don't mind me sharing this, when we read the article together again in preparation for this interview, Dick is a combat veteran.
Mhm.
And at some point, as he was reading the article, he kind of broke up a little bit because there is the ongoing PTSD that our veterans experience, especially those who have experienced combat, and even people in this country who have experienced brutal treatment from the state, uh,
Mhm.
as my people have. And I appreciate that you put a focus on that and that we shouldn't just celebrate wars, but I think that we should honor the veterans, but we should also keep in mind the damage that is done.
Absolutely. And I'm glad that you mentioned that aspect of our history because I talked a bit in my article about what happened in the years before and immediately after our Declaration of Independence was ratified, and a lot of that was bloodshed um, on the part of many untold millions of Native Americans who populated North America in at the time before um, our European settlers first arrived on this continent, the vast majority of whom were no longer with us at the start of the 1700s in our war for independence. So smallpox, cholera, typhoid, a whole variety of illnesses introduced by Europeans, in addition to displacement, wiped native populations out, and they continued to die and experience displacement in the years right before and after our very first Independence Day. It's really easy for me, at least now, to name some of the costs of war that occur in our modern era, because this is something I study and think about a lot, and I'm part of a military community. But centuries after our war for independence in the United States, as a white American, I am not dealing with the footprint of colonization the way people of color and people with Native heritage deal with it. And at that time, there was mass displacement brought about by European colonists and soldiers who again and again and again broke treaties brokered with Native groups, such as, the coalition under Chief Potomac, for example, where Europeans promised not to encroach on Native territory and then did and pushed them out. And the costs of those conflicts and broken promises were severe and included mass displacement, death, illness, and starvation, because people were cut off from their livelihoods and their communities.
Yeah, we recently watched, I thought, a really interesting documentary about the butchery of the buffalo in the Plains Indians, and done quite purposely, not really to gather the hides, not for food, but to destroy a whole food source for all the Plains Indians and decimate those tribes. And the thing is, other countries, Mexico and Brazil, Europeans settled there and created multiracial communities or countries. But we decided we needed a white Christian society, and so felt empowered to just displace people to our great detriment. I mean, now we're at the point where we're becoming, despite Stephen Miller, we're becoming a minority, but kind of at the back end with a lot of anger and racism
and unresolved racial divisions that, if not resolved, I think represent an existential threat to what could possibly be a democracy unless we address this. And I think that's one of the PTSD symptoms that this country as a whole, if a country can have PTSD, I would suggest that the country as a whole continues to suffer from this unresolved trauma of racial non-reconciliation.
Yes. I mean, one way that was powerfully driven home to me was when I first saw Michael Moore's Bowling for Columbine in the early 2000s. And a professor at Brown later drove home that message as, essentially what you just shared, Sharon, like just that we carry with us the legacy of mass violence against people who were here when European settlers first arrived. And we forget it in our history books and in the way we talk about the past. But in many of us, in many Americans, there is a real paranoia about what it would mean to be a majority minority and fear of retaliation, because on some level, like, we know what we did. And that's a gross oversimplification of what you said and what I think Moore was showing in his documentary. But I do think that we need to reconcile with the violence that was part of our formation, and it need not take away from some of the valuable parts of pushing back against an abusive crown, but it certainly needs to be more than a big part of the story.
Mm. So do you have a vision for how communities might redesign 4th of July remembrances or celebrations in ways that don't cause further harm to veterans or others that have been traumatized by state violence?
Not a complete one, but I do think that we need to stop fighting over who gets to be included and who gets left out. I mean, the notion that folks get angry, that people on, the MAGA coalition get angry about, maybe an article like mine, or people who don't want to celebrate the 4th of July is preposterous to me. Of course, there are going to be folks that don't feel good about Independence Day. There were so many other things going on then that we don't talk about. So that's one thing. Stop arguing and start just listening. Also, listen to veterans, read the Cost of War Project's articles and watch the videos and understand what people today go through in order to live in this country and make their contributions. I'm talking about veterans and also, communities of color who have been brutalized by militarized police forces. There are many costs of these current wars. So do your homework. And then I don't really think we need fireworks. I mean, they're beautiful, but I get so bored sitting there for hours with my kids after like fighting through lines or crowds to get a good spot. And it's always underwhelming to me. So I would rather just have food and community, but that's me. I mean, I'm not going to die on that hill. No pun intended. I just don't care that much about fireworks, and I know they cause a lot of distress to some people.
And to animals.
And to animals, my gosh.
Yeah,
Yeah, I know.
On July 4th, we were at a very lovely hilltop house uh, from a friend of ours, and in the near distance was this very long, elaborate fireworks display. But Sharon and I were kind of cuddled over in the corner, just sort of tolerating it. I don't know. I don't know if any of that has to do with my military with Vietnam at all. I've never cared much for crowds. When I first came back from Vietnam, I couldn't stand to be touched. So I had to kind of stay away from people. And I never really, I didn't, well, when I first came back from Vietnam, I had the yips. So if there was a like loud explosion, I kind of jumped.
I bet.
But I'm over that. But I still, the fireworks, they just don't do anything for me. But the thing that, say, the thing I appreciate about your work and about the Brown University Cost of War Project is putting it in front of us what we really cost on the individual level, a financial level, reputational level. Here we are in the morning when Herr Trump is talking to his advisors about ramping up the war in Iran that he started, and we don't seem to have people like us complain about it, but we're not stopping it.
No, no. I mean, I don't see mass protests, even though we could all connect the dots by this point, even if it's just gas prices we care about
Yeah.
and food prices. But no, we don't care enough.
But you'll keep doing what you're doing. I'll keep doing what I'm doing. And I know Andrea will keep doing what she's doing. And it's partly because we're motivated by having information that maybe others don't have. Andrea, in your work as a clinician, you probably are exposed to information in the individuals' lives who have come back from war that the average person doesn't know about. And I sleep with a Vietnam veteran who was wounded in combat every night. Believe me. I know that's a different experience.
No, I was just wounded once, not every night.
You were not wounded every night. And he's an English major. So
Yeah, some of us have an up close and personal view
yeah,
of the cost of war
yeah, yeah.
and want to share it.
Want to share it, and we just don't want others to continue to experience it. And I think that's one of the most important points of your article, the cost of forgetting.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that we are ahistorical in many ways. We don't like learning our history, and that there, I guess you shouldn't generalize like that, but I think as a culture, we don't spend much time talking about what actually happened during the holidays like July 4th or Columbus Day,
Yes.
um, and all the violence surrounding those events.
But as you know, through your cost of war project, there's people who benefit mightily from war
Yes, yes.
in their reputations, in their pocketbook, in their industry, and they fight for it. I mean, they buy off Congress. That's why we have a tough time stopping stupid wars.
It takes many years to develop certain weapon systems. So corporations, Blackwater, Raytheon get large contracts spanning multiple years for weaponry that might be produced after the threat, real or perceived, isn't even spoken about anymore. And
Yeah.
I'm not an expert on this, but I agree with
Yeah.
you, what I'm
Yeah.
saying.
Yeah, I wrote an I was starting the research for an article that I haven't finished writing, but the topic is, that we have a war economy, but we cloak it so well that big Department of Defense or Department of War contractors like Raytheon, they have outlets or manufacturing outlets in Southern California, in Arizona, and they support these bedroom communities, with these manicured lawns and, a church on every corner. And everybody is really financially levied by the sale of these arms that go and blow up children in Iran.
Right.
Well, so I lived in a South Bay suburb of LA and worked in a defense plant for a while.
Mhm.
And I worked among people who weren't too crazy about the things that we were building. We were building power supplies for missiles. But it was by far the best job in town,
Hmm. Yeah.
and so it was like, well, do you want to flip hamburgers or do you want to design rockets?
Right. And we're all, or many of us are complicit in that system of making war. I'm not going to go into detail, but my family included. I think that one of the problems with our system right now is that veterans aren't offered many options coming out of the military for how they're going to make a living. And the industries that most actively recruit them are the defense industry because they have specialized knowledge about what the military needs and who to talk to and how to present information. So we need more conduits that make use of veterans' talents, and we need more jobs, period.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We need more types of jobs. Yeah, the Cost of War Project does a good job discussing the opportunity costs of war, like how many more jobs we could create if we spent the trillions we've spent on war
Yeah.
in these past decades on education and housing and healthcare.
And fortunately for us, your organization provides a lot of information about the cost of war and some of the other things that we could have done had we not spent those funds on war. So tell our listening audience, how do they find that website?
So it's in front of me right now because I admit I'm not always current on what's up there. It's costsofwar.watson.brown.edu. Again, that's costsofwar.watson.brown.edu. And you can look at the human costs in terms of people injured and killed, and including non-invisible injuries like post-traumatic stress disorder. Um, there's the economic costs. So there's a whole tab on that with lots of great research. And then there's also social and political costs, like what it's done to our democracy and to the democracies in countries we were supposed to democratize, purportedly,
Yeah,
to go to
at the
war.
end of the barrel of a gun. How do you bring democracy
I know.
with a guy that just doesn't make sense.
Yeah,
No.
yeah, exactly. And then the environmental costs. Yeah. So the environmental costs of war, are staggering too in terms of the contaminants we leave when we go to war. The carbon emissions of the Department of Defense, and the way we deal with the byproducts, burn pits, um, waste disposal around US bases, noise pollution, all of those factors are ones covered by, costs of war researchers.
Yeah, yeah. Now, in the recent reports of veterans who were killed, um, I've heard it said a couple of times that, well, they volunteered and so they knew what they were getting into. And boy, does that irk me, especially when I look at these young 19-year-old Latina, many of these people are what do you call them? Economic
Economic
drafts.
draft. Yeah.
Do you have any comments to make on the fact that so many, this is their ticket out of the ghetto? Or
Right. I don't want to deny that people have free will and make choices. I think I don't want to dehumanize people, but I agree wholeheartedly that people make choices within certain constraints. And I think, many of those, if not most, killed in America's war on terror were actually from middle income, middle America, sort of white communities. But that doesn't mean that people of color, and women were not affected in very particular ways by these wars, including, through sexual violence by their own, comrades in arms, and discrimination and racism in terms of promoting decisions and, um, you know, the climate within units and commands. But more to your point, Sharon, I know that people living in inner city majority minority contexts have far fewer options. They have less intergenerational wealth. They are less likely to go on to get a college degree, for reasons having to do with mentorship and money and access to information, and see a bleaker horizon if they don't do one of the very few things that is accessible to poor communities of color for economic mobility, and that is joining the military and having your education paid for if you want it. But of course, you don't know what you're going into. No one knows what a war is going to look like until they're there. I don't know what a war looks like.
Well, Andrea, this has been wonderful. We love reading your articles. We love you taking a half hour to talk to us, and thank you so much. We'll do it again
and we
soon.
want to encourage everyone to visit the website. The Cost of War Project has so much great information. Thank you, Andrea.
Thank you for having me. It was great to see you.
Thank you for sticking around. If you like the LA Progressive content and the discussions we have here, please consider clicking the subscribe button below and also give us a thumbs up. That helps to grow our audience by feeding the algorithm, which helps to get this content in front of more eyes. Thanks for stopping by. We really appreciate your support.